The moment the shuttle doors opened, the smell hit him first. Not a bad smell, nothing like that. It was warm and layered, like 1,000 flowers had agreed to stop competing and just exist together. Nathan Cole stepped out onto the landing platform of the station called Oru and pulled his diplomatic jacket straight. Behind him, the shuttle hummed and sealed itself shut. Ahead of him, a crowd of beings he had never seen in his life stood in 2 perfect lines, and every single one of them was staring at him. Not looking, staring. He smiled and raised his hand in the small wave that Ambassador Director Lydia Park had drilled into him for 6 weeks. Friendly, but not too eager. Confident, but not aggressive. The universal body language of a man who had no idea what he was walking into, but was fully committed to pretending otherwise. One of the beings at the front of the line stepped forward. It stood about 2 meters tall, covered in pale silver-green skin that shifted color slightly at the edges, the way oil shifts on water. It had 4 arms, 2 eyes the color of deep amber, and what appeared to be ceremonial fabric draped across its shoulders in long ribbons of gold and white. It spoke, and a small translation device clipped to Nathan's collar turned the sounds into English with a slight delay. "You honor us," the device said. "The union awaits. The circle will be completed." Nathan smiled again and nodded. "Thank you. I am honored to be here. Ambassador Director Park sends her deepest respects. I am Nathan Cole, Cultural Liaison, Earth Diplomatic Corps." The being tilted its head in a way that the briefing documents had described as a sign of warmth and welcome. Then it turned and began walking, clearly expecting Nathan to follow. He followed. The inside of Oruvelka was enormous. It had been described to him as a residential and civic station, home to the Valari, a species that had been aware of humanity for about 12 years now. The Valari were not hostile. They were not dangerous. They were, according to every report Nathan had read, extraordinarily communal, deeply ceremonial, and famously untranslatable in matters of social ritual. That last part had been in the briefing documents in bold text with 2 underlines. He had thought that was just bureaucratic caution. He was starting to think it was a warning. The corridor they walked through was decorated with thousands of small glowing objects, each one a different shade of blue and gold, suspended in the air at different heights with no visible support. The effect was somewhere between a cathedral and a dream. Other Valari lined the path and watched Nathan walk past with those same amber eyes, that same careful stillness. "Is there anything I should know before we arrive?" Nathan asked, keeping his voice low and pleasant. The guide spoke, and the caller translated. "Everything has been prepared. The elders have reviewed the offerings. The match was accepted before your arrival." Nathan processed that for a moment. "I'm sorry, the match?" "The compatibility determination," the guide said. "It is rare for an exterior species to be found compatible. The elders deliberated for 4 seasons. Your records were studied with great care." Nathan had a very specific feeling. It was the feeling of a man standing on ice who has just heard a crack but cannot yet see where it came from. "My records," he said. "Your biological records, your temperament profiles, your diplomatic history, your social architecture." The guide paused in front of a set of enormous doors, made of something that looked like carved stone, but breathed slightly as they approached, the surface expanding and contracting in a slow, steady rhythm. The families were honored by the match. It has not happened in recorded history that an exterior being has been found compatible with the Oru families. The doors opened inward. The room beyond was the size of a football stadium. It was full, And every Velari in that room turned to look at Nathan Cole. And the sound that rose from them was something between music and held breath. The ceiling above was open to the stars. The floor beneath was a mosaic of colors that moved slowly, like a living thing. In the center of the room, arranged in a wide circle, stood a group of Velari that even Nathan, who had never met a Velari before 6 minutes ago, could tell were significant. Their robes were longer. Their ribbons were more numerous. They stood with the particular stillness of people who have waited a very long time for something and have chosen to express that wait as dignity. And standing among them, or rather, arranged in a semicircle facing the center, were 12 Velari women. The guide stopped beside Nathan and spoke. "The ceremony will begin now," the caller translated, "and you may approach the circle." Nathan stood still for exactly 3 seconds, which was the amount of time it took him to look at the 12 Velari women, the enormous ceremonial room, the watching crowd of thousands, and add together the phrase "the match was accepted" with the phrase "the circle will be completed." The ice cracked. He stepped forward anyway. Because Nathan Cole had been chosen for this posting specifically for one reason that Director Park had stated in his evaluation with complete honesty. When everything around him turned incomprehensible, he did not stop moving. He stepped into the circle. The room exhaled, and one of the 12 Velari women stepped toward him, her amber eyes catching the starlight from above, and said something that the caller translated in a voice that sounded almost amused. "Finally," she said, we were beginning to think you would hesitate." "Never," Nathan said, and smiled, and had absolutely no idea what was about to happen to him. But he was already in the circle, and the doors had already closed. The first thing any diplomat learns is how to stay calm while panicking internally. Nathan Cole had not just learned this skill. He had refined it. He had practiced it in low-gravity simulations, cultural collision drills, and one deeply unfortunate incident on the Titan station that his personnel file described only as resolved without incident. He breathed in through his nose, out through his mouth, and kept his smile exactly where it was while his brain fired questions at him like a broken sprinkler. The Velari woman who had spoken stood about a head shorter than him, which surprised him because most of the Velari he had passed in the corridor had been taller. Her ribbon robes were white and deep violet, braided together in patterns that changed when the light moved. She had 4 arms, like the others, but her posture was relaxed in a way that the others were not. She was watching him with an expression the caller was not translating, because the caller only translated spoken language, and her expression was doing something entirely on its own. "I am called Vile Ori," the caller said for her, a beat after she spoke. "Eldest daughter of the Oruketh family. You are the exterior being named Nathan Cole, Cultural Liaison of the Earth Diplomatic Corps." "That is me," Nathan said. "You look confused," she said. "I look attentive," he said. She tilted her head in that way that meant warmth. Then she gestured, and the 11 other women in the circle each stepped forward by exactly 1 step in perfect synchronization, a motion so precise it had clearly been rehearsed. The collar at Nathan's throat stayed quiet for a moment. Then it said, in the flat tone it used for contextual notes, "Ceremony of the Oru Circle. Translation advisory. High concentration of ritual language. Equivalence may be approximate." Nathan had learned to read translation advisories. This one meant, "We cannot fully translate what is happening, and we apologize in advance." An elder stood at the edge of the circle. It was ancient in the way that some beings are ancient, not just in years, but in the weight they carry in a room. It spoke, and the collar worked hard. The exterior being has entered the circle willingly, the caller said. The first threshold is passed. The family's witness, the stars' witness. The circle is not broken until it is chosen to be broken. The crowd made that sound again, that musical, held-breath sound. Nathan kept smiling. He turned slightly toward Vialori and spoke from the corner of his mouth, diplomat quiet. I want to make sure I understand the ceremony correctly. I was invited as a guest, a diplomatic guest, to observe a union. You were invited? Vialori said, and her tone suggested she was choosing words carefully. Because you were found compatible. Compatible, Nathan said. With what specifically? She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the 11 women in the circle. Then she looked back at him. The caller made a sound it had never made before, a small, uncertain tone, and then it said, The Oru circle is the ceremony of plural bonding. The exterior being has entered as the central figure. The 12 families are represented by the 12 daughters. The exterior being is the point of union. Nathan breathed in, breathed out. When you say point of union, he said. You are the guest, Vialori said. And then she said something else, and the caller translated it slowly, like it was being careful. And you are also, from the moment you entered the circle, the husband. The room was still watching. The stars were still visible through the open ceiling. The mosaic floor was still slowly moving beneath his feet. Nathan Cole had a very particular talent. It had gotten him posted to 6 alien worlds in 4 years. It had resolved the Titan incident, and it had kept him breathing through things that would have sent less adaptable people directly to a hospital bed. The talent was this. When the ground disappeared, he did not freeze. He cataloged. So he cataloged 12 women, 12 families, 1 ceremony. One word he had not expected to be applied to himself today. A translation advisory that was still blinking at the edge of his collar. A room full of beings waiting to see what he would do. A door that had closed. And Vialori, watching him with something in her expression that the caller still refused to translate. But that Nathan, who had studied faces in 6 solar systems, recognized as the very specific look of a person who is waiting to find out if they made a good choice. He turned to face the elder. I have a question, he said. About the circle. The elder inclined its head. If the exterior being has a question about the ceremony, Nathan said, speaking carefully, is there a designated moment for that? Or is it better to ask now? The elder paused. The caller translated its response with something that might have been surprise in the undertone. Questions from the central figure are permitted at all moments. It is considered a sign of intelligence. Excellent, Nathan said. Then I would like to understand what being the point of union means in terms of the families. Not the ceremony. The families. The daily life. The actual practical structure of what is being agreed to here. The room made a different sound. Not the musical exhale. Something more curious, more alive. Vialori's expression shifted, and this time the caller attempted a translation, and then what it produced was interest, reassessment, the specific feeling of a person updating their expectation. You are asking, she said slowly, not to object, but to understand. I was sent here to build a relationship between my people and yours, Nathan said. I cannot build anything without understanding what I am standing in. The elder spoke for a long time then, and the caller worked harder than it ever had, and what it produced was this. The Oru circle was not a ceremony of possession. It was a ceremony of connection. The central figure was not owned by the 12 families. The central figure was shared by them in the sense that water is shared by roots. Each family had its own structure, its own house, its own life. The central figure was the thread that ran between them, present in each family's life at agreed intervals, marked a living point of communication and kinship between 12 houses that had historically been separate. It was less like a marriage in the human sense, and more like a diplomat who had been woven into a network of 12 households and was expected to know all of them and serve as the living bridge between them. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "So you studied my records and decided I was qualified for this specific role because I am a diplomat?" "Yes," Vile Ori said, "a living bridge between multiple parties who need communication and connection." "Yes." "That is?" Nathan said, and he heard his own voice doing something that was not quite a laugh. "Actually what I do." The elder made a sound that the caller translated as, "Exactly." The crowd, which had been watching all of this with extraordinary attention, made the musical sound again, but louder. Fuller. Vile Ori was looking at him with that expression the caller had translated as the specific feeling of a person updating their expectation. Nathan looked at the 12 women in the circle. They were watching him with 12 sets of amber eyes, 12 different postures, 12 different versions of waiting. "I have more questions," he said. "Of course you do," Vile Ori said. And this time the caller caught her tone perfectly. She was amused. He was not entirely sure that was a bad sign. The questions took the rest of the afternoon. This was not how Oru circle ceremonies typically proceeded. The guide who had walked Nathan from the landing platform had, at some point during the second hour, sat down on the floor of the ceremonial hall and simply started watching. Several of the elders who had been standing at the edges of the circle had done the same. The crowd, which had been large and formal and still at the beginning, had gradually become informal in the way that crowds do when something unexpected and interesting has replaced the expected and scheduled thing. Nathan stood in the center of the circle and asked questions. The 12 women answered. He learned that the Oru families were 12 distinct households that had been in a state of careful cooperation for several hundred years. Cooperation being the Valari word for a relationship that was neither alliance nor rivalry, but something in between, like neighboring rivers that never quite merge. The Oru circle ceremony had been used historically to resolve points of tension between the families by introducing a shared connection to a central figure who belonged to none of them exclusively, and therefore could move between all of them without the politics of belonging to any one side. The last Oru circle had been performed 230 years ago. That central figure had served for 40 years before dying of old age, and the families had described those 40 years as the most stable and productive in their modern history. Then the families had been unable to agree on a new central figure, because the candidates always came from within the Valari community, and therefore always belonged, in some ancestral sense, to one of the 12 houses, which undermined the point. This was what had made Nathan Cole's diplomatic records interesting to the Valari scholars who had been studying Earth for a decade. He was, by definition, exterior. He belonged to none of the 12 houses. He had no ancestral claim. He had no debt. He had no history with any of the families that could be weaponized. He was, in Valari terms, a perfect blank center point around which 12 circles could be drawn without any one circle claiming priority. The woman who explained this to him was named Diel Ori, the second daughter of the Oru Seth family. She was tall, even by Valari standards, and she had a manner of speaking that was precise in the way of someone who had prepared very carefully and was going to be heard. She used her 2 upper arms to gesture while she talked, while her lower arms stayed still. which the caller translated as contextual note. Lower arm stillness in presentation indicates high confidence. "We did not abduct you," Dial Ori said. "We invited you, and the invitation was sent through your diplomatic corps with full documentation." "With full documentation," Nathan said. "Yes. That documentation," he said carefully, "did it include the word husband?" Dial Ori looked at Violori. Violori looked at the ceiling. Another of the 12 women, small and quick-eyed, named Farah Keth from the Oruketh family, made a sound that the caller translated as suppressed laughter. "The documentation," Dial Ori said, "described the role in terms of diplomatic connection, cultural representation, and familial integration." The elders believed these terms were clear. "The elders," Nathan said, "have never sent a document to the Earth Diplomatic Corps before." "That is true?" "The Earth Diplomatic Corps," Nathan said, "received a document describing a role of diplomatic connection, cultural representation, and familial integration, and they sent a cultural liaison." He let that sit for a moment. "They sent me," he said. Farah Keth made the suppressed laughter sound again, louder this time. The truth, which Nathan had already assembled from the pieces he had been given, was this. The Valari documentation had been accurate. It had described exactly what the Oru Circle was. But the Earth Diplomatic Corps, reading a document about a ceremonial role at an alien wedding event, had translated familial integration as honored guest at a bonding ceremony, and had sent a cultural liaison to observe and represent. No one on Earth had understood that the cultural liaison was not going to the wedding. The cultural liaison was the wedding. Nathan stood with this understanding for a long moment. Around him, the 12 women waited. The elders waited. What remained of the formal crowd waited. The ceremony had been paused in a way that apparently had no precedent, and the entire hall was in a state of quiet suspension, watching a human man think. He thought about Director Lydia Park, who had briefed him for 6 weeks. He thought about the 6 weeks of body language drills and cultural sensitivity modules, and the bold underlined warning about Valari social ritual being famously untranslatable. He thought about the translation advisory that was still blinking at the edge of his collar. He thought about what the elder had said, that the Oru Circle was a living bridge, a diplomat woven into a network of 12 households. He thought about the fact that this was, structurally, exactly what he did. He looked at Violori. She was watching him the way she had been watching him since the beginning. With that expression, the caller now translated with more confidence, waiting to see what kind of person you are. "I need to contact my director," he said. The elder inclined its head. "Of course." "And while I do that," he said, "I would like to continue asking questions, specifically about what the practical structure of this role looks like on a daily basis. Schedules, expectations, the nature of the visits to each household, the communication protocols between families." "You want operational details," Dial Ori said, and her precise voice had a different quality in it now. "I want to understand what I am being asked to do before I decide whether I can do it well," Nathan said. "I do not agree to things I cannot do well." The elder spoke, and then the caller caught all of it this time, clean and clear. "The exterior being," the elder said, "understands the circle better than we anticipated." Farah Keth stopped suppressing her laughter. Vial Ori's expression shifted into something the caller translated as, "Yes, that is exactly it. That is the thing I was waiting to find out." Nathan pulled out his communication device and opened a channel to Earth. Director Park answered on the third tone, and before she could speak, he said, Director, I have a situation. I need you to pull the original Valari documentation for this posting, all of it, untranslated. And I need you to find someone who can tell me what the phrase Oru Circle Central Figure means in the context of Valari family law. There was a pause. Nathan, Director Park said, in a tone that told him she already suspected. What happened? I am currently standing in the middle of a ceremony, he said, that I appear to be the center of. Another pause. Are you in danger? He looked around at the room, at the 12 women, the waiting elders, the crowd that had turned into an audience, at the open ceiling full of stars. No, he said, but I may be significantly more married than I was this morning. The silence on the other end of the line lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then Director Park said, in a voice that was doing its absolute best to remain professional, I am pulling the documents right now. Director Park's voice through the communicator had taken on the particular tone of a person who has just read something and deeply regrets not having read it earlier. Nathan, she said. Yes, he said. The original Valari documentation describes the invited participant as the Orivel, which is a Valari compound term. The literal translation is the one who holds the thread between. I know what it means now, Nathan said. What did your office translate it as? The pause told him everything before she spoke. Honored bridging guest, she said. Farah Keth, who was standing close enough to hear, made the suppressed laughter sound one more time. And this time, she did not suppress it at all. Nathan breathed in, breathed out. Director, he said, I want you to send me everything the Valari have officially communicated to Earth Diplomatic Corps in the last 5 years. Every document, every message, every proposal. That is going to take a few hours. That is fine. I have things to do here. Nathan. Her voice shifted. Not professional now. Careful. The voice of someone who has realized that the man they sent into an unknown situation is currently navigating something none of their protocols were written for. Are you actually all right? He considered the question seriously, which was the only honest way to answer it. The 12 women of the Oru circle were arranged in a loose conversational cluster now, no longer the formal semicircle of the ceremony, having apparently decided during his phone call that if the ceremony was paused, they were going to use the time practically. 2 of them were in conversation with one of the elders. One was examining his communication device with open curiosity from a polite distance. Diel Ori had produced a small tablet and was apparently taking notes. Viel Ori was sitting on what appeared to be a step near the edge of the circle. Watching him with that expression, the caller had now learned to translate as assessment, ongoing. Yes, he said. I am. But Director, I need you to understand something. The misunderstanding was real, and it was on our end. The Valari documentation was accurate. Our translation was incomplete. They did not deceive us. I understand that. Then I need you to also understand that I am going to need authorization to conduct these conversations in an extended capacity. Because what is happening here is not a ceremony that I can politely exit. It is a diplomatic situation, and the diplomatic situation has some very specific characteristics that I think could actually benefit the relationship between Earth and the Valari if handled well. Director Park was quiet for a moment. What kind of characteristics? The Oru families have been in cooperative tension with each other for 2 centuries. They chose an Earth liaison specifically because we are exterior to their politics. They need a bridge figure who carries no ancestral weight in their system. That is, structurally, the same reason you sent me to Titan, to the Carroll Station, and to the boundary negotiations in year 4 of the Accord. He paused. Director, they did not pick a human by accident. They picked me specifically because my file described exactly the kind of work I do. The silence from Director Park was different this time. Thinking silence. You are saying they were right to pick you, she said. I am saying their scholars understood my job description better than our translators understood their ceremony documents, he said. Another silence. I am going to need to escalate this, she said. There are going to be people on the council who react badly. I know, he said. Tell them I am fine, I am not in danger, and I am handling a diplomatic situation with care. That is the truth. Let me do my job. Nathan. Director. Do you understand what you are agreeing to? He turned and looked at the 12 women. 12 families. 230 years without a central figure. 12 households running alongside each other like neighboring rivers that never merged, waiting for someone to be the water that moved between them. And he thought about what he was good at. I understand what I am being asked to do, he said. And I understand that I am probably the most qualified human alive to do it. Director Park made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh. I will get you the authorization. Standard diplomatic extended posting. 6 months initial with review. Thank you, Director. Nathan. One more pause. Try not to do anything that cannot be undone. He looked at the closed doors of the Oru Hall, at the open ceiling full of Valari stars, at the living mosaic floor. I make no promises, he said, and closed the channel. Vael Ori was still watching him from the step. When he walked toward her, she tilted her head in the warmth gesture. You have authorization, she said. Not a question. Yes, he said. Provisional, on 6 months initial. You understand that the Oru Circle is not provisional, she said. The Circle does not have a review period. I know, he said. The authorization from my people is provisional. What I am agreeing to here is not. She was quiet for a moment, studying him in a way that felt specific and careful, the way a person looks at something they expected to be one thing and have found to be another. You understand the difference, she said. I am a diplomat, he said. I live in the difference. She stood up from the step and walked toward the center of the circle, and the 11 other women, apparently reading something in her movement that needed no translation, began to move back into their positions, slow and unhurried, reforming the semicircle without any signal that Nathan could detect, and the elder rose from where it had been seated. The remaining crowd settled. The ceremony, which had been suspended for 3 hours in a way that had apparently never happened before in the history of the Oru Circle, resumed. The elder spoke, and the caller translated clearly. The exterior being has asked, has listened, has understood. The circle continues. Nathan walked back to the center. 12 sets of amber eyes, all watching. He stood with his feet on the living mosaic floor, under the open sky full of stars he did not know the names of yet. In the center of a ceremony he had walked into as a guest and would walk out of as something else entirely. And he thought that this was, genuinely, the most interesting thing that had ever happened to him. The elder spoke the next words of the ceremony. Nathan listened carefully, and when the caller translated the part that required a response, he gave one. And the circle, after 230 years, was complete. 6 weeks after the ceremony, Nathan Cole had a schedule. It was the most complex schedule he had ever operated under in his entire career, and he had once coordinated simultaneous negotiations on 3 connected stations during a communication blackout. The schedule was maintained by an elder of the Oru families named Velha, who was approximately 300 years old, and managed the logistics of 12 households with the calm precision of someone who had been doing this since before Nathan's grandparents were born. Velha had, within 4 days of the ceremony, produced a color-coded rotation system that assigned Nathan to each family's household for a set period each week. He with travel time, meal customs, communication windows, and rest intervals all carefully mapped. Nathan had looked at the chart for a long time. Then he had said, "This is excellent work." Velha had tilted its head and said something that the caller translated as, "I know." The first household he visited was the Oru Keth family. Farah Keth, the quick-eyed woman who had laughed during the ceremony, met him at the door of the family estate with the straightforward manner of someone who had decided formality was a waste of time between people who already knew each other. "You are late," she said. "We have food." "I am 7 minutes early," Nathan said. 7 minutes early is late by Oru Keth standards, she said, and walked inside, clearly expecting him to follow. He followed. The Oru Keth household was loud in the way of families that had been large for generations. There were children, which surprised him because the briefing documents had not mentioned Valari children specifically. And the children were interested in him with the direct, unguarded curiosity that children have when they have not yet learned to be polite about staring. One child, very small, approximately the height of Nathan's knee, stood in front of him and stared upward with enormous amber eyes and said something. The caller translated it as, "You only have 2 arms." "Yes," Nathan said. "Where did the other ones go?" "I only ever had 2, he said. The child considered this with a serious face. "That seems like a problem." "I manage," Nathan said. Farah Keth called something from another room, and the child ran toward the sound with the specific urgency of a person responding to the promise of food. Dinner with the Oru Keth family lasted 4 hours. It was loud and argumentative, and warm in the way of families that argue because they are comfortable, not because they are angry. Nathan sat between Farah Keth and an older member of the family named Kair Keth, who had opinions about Earth's orbital construction projects that he shared in great detail. And Nathan answered each opinion seriously and asked questions back. And by the end of the meal, Kair Keth was addressing him not as the exterior being, but by his name, which Farah Keth later told him was a significant thing. "He does not use names easily," she said. "I noticed," Nathan said. "You asked him good questions," she said. "Because he respects questions more than answers." The next household was the Oru Seth family, where Del Ori received him with the same precise formality she had used in the ceremony, and walked him through the family estate with the thoroughness of a person conducting an orientation briefing. She showed him the archive room where the family stored 4 centuries of records, the communication center where they managed their commercial operations, and the garden where 7 varieties of plants grew that existed nowhere else in the known universe. "The garden is maintained by the youngest daughter," Dialori said. "She is not present today. She is at a research posting. But she asked me to tell you that she will be here for your second visit." "What does she research?" Nathan asked. "Cross-species agricultural compatibility," Dale Ori said. "She is very interested in earth soil composition." Nathan looked at the 7 plants that existed nowhere else. "I can get her samples," he said. "I know people at the Earth Agricultural Science Corps. Certified samples, full documentation." Dale Ori was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in a voice that was precise but had something new under it, "That would be very welcome." The weeks moved forward. Nathan visited all 12 households, and each one was different in ways that the briefing documents could not have prepared him for, because the briefing documents had not known this was where he was going. The Oruvel family was formal and artistic. their estate full of sculptures that moved when you looked at them directly. The Oru Bryn family was agricultural and practical, and the eldest member handed Nathan a tool on his first visit and expected him to help with the work, which he did, badly at first and then with more competence. And the eldest member watched his improvement with the satisfaction of a teacher. The Orodath family was the smallest and the quietest, and their daughter Saeldath sat with him in the evenings and asked him questions about Earth in the particular way of someone building a map in their mind. "What does the ocean look like?" she asked. He told her. And then, because her questions kept coming, he found himself talking about things he had not thought about in years. The color of the sky at a specific time of evening in the city where he had grown up. The sound of rain on a roof. The way traffic moved in the early morning when most people were still sleeping. Small things, no ordinary things. The kind of things that are invisible when you live inside them and become enormous when you are very far away. Saeldath listened to all of it without interrupting. And at the end she said, "Earth sounds like a place that is always doing several things at once." "Yes," he said, "that is exactly what it is." Between the household visits, the 12 women of the Oru circle had their own scheduled time with him, individually and occasionally in small groups. And these were different from the household visits in a way that was harder to define. With the households, his role was clear. Cultural bridge, moving presence, the thread between. In the individual conversations, the role was quieter, less defined, more like two people figuring out what kind of people they were to each other. Vael Ori was the most direct, she asked him once, during a walk through the outer corridor of the station where the stars were visible through the transparent walls. What he had expected when he accepted the posting. "I expected to observe a ceremony and write a report," he said. "And instead," she said, "and instead I have a schedule and a color-coded rotation system and an elderly elder who will send me a reminder notification if I am more than 4 minutes late." "Velha takes the schedule seriously," she said. "Velha takes everything seriously," he said. "I respect that." She was quiet for a moment, looking at the stars. "Does this feel wrong to you?" she said. "The circle, the families, the way it happened." He thought about it honestly, which was the only way he had ever known how to think. "It was not what I was expecting," he said. "But the thing it is does not feel wrong to me. I am good at being the thread between. I have been doing it my whole career. I just have never done it with 12 families who make very good food and argue about orbital construction at dinner." Vel Ori made a sound that the caller translated as the closest thing the Valari had to a laugh that was also warm. "We did not expect you to adapt this well," she said. "What did you expect?" "Resistance," she said. "Objection. The formal invocation of exterior being protocol, which would have dissolved the circle and required us to begin the selection process again." "That option existed?" he said. "It always exists," she said. "The circle is not a trap. It is a choice. It was always a choice." He stood with that for a moment. "You could have told me that at the beginning," he said. You never asked," she said. "I asked a lot of questions." "You asked about structure and function and operational details," she said. "You did not ask if you could leave." He thought about that, about the moment he had stepped into the circle and heard the doors close, about the ice-cracking sound in his mind, about the 3 seconds he had stood still. "No," he said. "I did not ask that." "Why not?" she said. He looked at the stars through the transparent wall. Stars he was learning the names of now. Slowly, the way you learn the names of streets in a city you have decided to live in. Because I was already inside, he said. "And the thing I do is not stand at the edge and ask if I can leave. The thing I do is figure out how to be useful where I am." While Ori looked at him for a long time, with the expression the caller had learned to translate well by now. The specific feeling of a person who made a choice, and has found that the choice was better than they knew. She did not say anything. She did not have to. The stars outside were bright and cold and very far from Earth, and Nathan Cole stood in the middle of them and thought that he was, in the specific and unrepeatable way of a life that keeps surprising itself, exactly where he was supposed to be. Velha's reminder notification arrived on his communicator 2 minutes later. He had a dinner with the Orubrine family in 20 minutes and was expected to help with the evening agricultural work before the meal. He turned and walked back through the corridor, and the stars stayed where they were, and the circle held.